So this class is for 11b. So we left off in Halacha Tes. We learned Zayin, Ches, and Tes, and we're going to begin Yud. We'll probably do Yud today. We hope we finish even Yud. But let's start. Shitrei Hadyates, which is literally translated as simple documents. And he's going to give a few examples. One thing we'll notice that they're not simple at all for that matter. But this is in the context of Shabbos and Chol. Shabbos and the weekday. In the context of Shabbos, they're definitely Hadyates. They have nothing to do with Shabbos at all. That's why they're called simple. When you say, a hedyet is called, there's many times in the Talmud, you have this expression of a hedyet. Literally means a simpleton, a simple person. And in this case, the documents in the face of Shabbos, they're also hedyetis. Why am I saying that? Because if you look at the first example he gives, he says, Shitri chayves, documents of debt. They're not simple at all. Why does someone write a document of debt? Someone writes a document of debt because he needs that security. He just lends somebody, he's glad to lend somebody $2,000 or $4,000, an example, and he needs the security. So sometimes there's an actual deposit. Someone gives him a watch which is worth $1,000 or $2,000, so there's a greater sense of security. But many times, most of the time, it's a document. They write a document. I lent you $10,000. I lent you $2,000, $3,000. And you're going to plan to give it to me back in Chodesh year, as an example, just any month, wherever the period of the year they're holding, or whatever, how long you gave the loan, and the borrower signs his name. That's a sense of security for the one who is lending this money. So it's not simple at all. So why would he call Shtari Chayves Hedyetes? Because the answer is, in the context of Shabbos, it's certainly Hedyet, because there is a monetary value to this. This is kind of, he looks at it as like his money. His money is in this document. Money on Shabbos is certainly Hedyet in comparison to the great Kedusha of the day of Shabbos, the holiness of the day of Shabbos. So in the context of Shabbos, it's called Shtari Hadyatis. And he's going to give a few examples. I just want to mention, when we come to Shtari Chayves, I just want to mention that, very important, by the way, the writing of a document is very important. The Gemara even says that even Talmid Chachamim should also write documents, even they trust each other, and a Talmid Chacham lives a different standard type of life. There's much more honesty, faithfulness, integrity, and therefore, really between one Talmid Chacham, even $5,000, he says he's going to give it back, usually he would give it back. But the Gemara suggests always write a document, not because Chas v'Shalom someone wants to deliberately do something wrong. It's just time takes its course, time has its impact. What you see with all that clarity and transparency today, 2-3 months go by, even non-willingly, inadvertently, you could easily forget certain details. It was exactly so, mention part of it, whatever it is, not because you want to deliberately do something wrong. It's just, again, time has an impact on everything, in every area of life, and therefore when it comes to a loan, the Chachamim brilliantly said it doesn't matter if you trust the other person, and the other person is truly trustworthy. Just write the document, because when you write the document, everything remains clear. Just saying this parenthetically, but Shtari Chayves is a very important document, but again, it's still called Shtari Hadyates. And then he gives another example, Cheshbonos, documents of accounting, which is also important documents. Accounting, or certain calculations which are made, which again have significance in the context of what this document represents. We gave a few examples when we spoke about speaking matters of Cheshbonos in Halacha Dalet, if you recall, so we won't elaborate on that. Then Iger Shel Sheila Shalom, letters of, literally it means greeting of peace, peaceful greetings. And what does that have to do with being muktzah on Shabbos? And again, he's going to say, Osir, it's prohibited, even to look into it without reading it, like, what is this? So the other ones I understand, because Shtar Chay, this is kind of This is the closest he can get to his money, so it kind of has a monetary value. Or it's about not only monetary value, everything has a monetary value. I mean, this is money for him, for the lender. Cheshbeinus is certainly matters of chayil in the face of Shabbos. But letters, what does letters have to do with it? But the simple answer, we don't have to go deep. First of all, today we don't accumulate letters as much as we did in the past. Today it's just a click away. Someone wants to see a certain letter which they got from this and this person 5-16 years ago in this summer, right after camp or middle of camp. It's just a click away. Put in the name, it comes up. But in the past, not such a long past ago, if you will, there was people held letters because they went to camp and they wrote to their friend and they wrote to their parents wrote them. It was still that letter thing, and people keep their letters and people to pile them up because it's brings out a certain sentimental, to relive that period when they got the letter, and it brings out a certain positive sentiment. When you read a letter of the past and suddenly someone's dear to you, someone's a family member, a close family member, a close friend. But in the end of the day, most of these letters are stuff that not necessarily have Shabbos-tic content. I won bunk competition and I went to this amusement park with my bunk and it was great. It's not Shabbos-tic. So all these simple greetings, he calls it greetings from one friend to another, it's not only because someone greeting a friend, there's a problem, because it's good to greet a friend, and especially in a positive way. But it's the letter of Sheila Shalom, which usually most of these letters don't have any divine content. Nothing bad, obviously, we're talking about Yidden, they don't write to each other bad stuff, but nothing, nonetheless, it's not Shabbos-tic. So these letters are really muktzah. And as such, you're not meant to read them on Shabbos. That's the simple meaning of this halacha. So he says, Osir, not only not to read, but la'ayin bahem likriya, even to look at them, even without reading, verbally uttering the words, you're also not allowed to do. Now, I just want to make it clear. Two things. First of all, that tells us right away if someone gets a letter like of a shilas or chuvas, which were many correspondence which great Talmid Chacham had with each other. They came up a certain question in a community, and one wrote a response to that question. Obviously, you're allowed to look at it because that's Torah, and that's sources of Torah and halachas of Torah. So even that's in the context of a letter, but that's not the Igris Shel She'ela Shalim. Someone would take beyond something to look at the Igris Chodesh, for example, of the Rebbe. Oh, it's a Igris, it's a letter. No, this is full of Kedusha. This is what Shabbos is all about. You're learning more of the Rebbe, which again, at Tzaddik, the Gemara says that Talmid Chacham is called Shabbos for the simple reason because everything about him is elevated, sublimated. His whole life is elevated and sublimated. That's what Shabbos is all about. So anything which is holy, obviously, doesn't fall into this category. It's a Igor Shel She'ela Shalim. Just regular letters. They're muktzah. That's one thing. Another thing, when he says you're prohibited to look at them without reading, make no mistake, that's really default. That's the way we look at a document. Someone wants to look at a document, let's say, in all three examples, a document of debt, he just wants to look at it to remind himself when the date is. At any given time, again, Shabbos you can't. But in the middle of the week, you pick it up and you don't say, well, I so-and-so lent so-and-so this amount of money on this date to be paid back on this date. You don't read it like that. Default reading is you look at it without reading. So he's not like telling you something beyond what we usually do. This is the way we read a document. It becomes cheshbeinus or a letter. Open a letter, and it doesn't mean you can't read any of the words. Sometimes we do. But generally, when you read something, it's looking at it without verbally uttering the words. So this is regular reading any document in your letter, but this is what he makes it clear. You're prohibited to do so. So it's not only about kriya, reading it, in other words, uttering the words, but even looking into it, it is prohibited. Because it's not Shabbos-tic. Now you can ask a question, didn't we learn in Halacha Yud, Halacha Vav, that as much as the Halacha doesn't recommend and doesn't commend of thinking, using your machshava in things which are out of the framework of Shabbos, but nonetheless, it's not clearly prohibited, because the halacha says clearly, the pasuk says v'daber davar, doesn't speak about machshava, so machshava is in essence permitted. The halacha would suggest it's not wise to think anything on Shabbos, like we learned in halacha vav, But black and white halacha, you're allowed to think. Thinking is not a violation. It's not a prohibition. So this seems to be using your thought to capture the information of that document. And he says clearly, you're not allowed to look into them the way you usually do without kriya. He doesn't say the way you usually do, but he just says you're not allowed to look into them even without verbally uttering the words on that document or on that letter. What does that say? That you're ultimately just thinking about them. You're absorbing that information of that document. That's another way of saying you're thinking about the information. But didn't we say thinking is permitted? The halacha itself is going to ask this question, and we're going to jump right away to the answer to say it orally before we read it inside. We could all appreciate there's a clear difference, because in Vav he's talking about someone, for example, just coming home from shul, just as a quick example, on Shabbos. Not in shul, not by the Kiddush, but let's say coming from shul, and then a thought of a business matter crosses his mind as he comes home from shul, just as an example. The halacha says, you can't say it's prohibited, you can't say you violated the Shabbos, because it's only machshava. It's not suggestible, and based on whatever we learned in Vav, it's more than not suggestible. It's nonsensical that he should think about something in the middle of the week on Shabbos, because kol malachti chasuya, whatever we learned in Halacha Vav. But it's not prohibited. But together with that, or because of this following, we can appreciate why it's permitted. Or this permissibility is in effect based on this backdrop. He's just walking from shul. There's no indication that he's thinking about any business matter. Someone could even be walking together with him or her. You don't know what they're thinking. We don't know what the other party's thinking, and they're not doing something overtly which says that they're thinking about that subject. They're just thinking about a business matter. That's where the Halacha Vav says it's permitted categorically from the perspective of Shabbos. But here it's very indicative that you're thinking about that document. You're holding the document. And that's why there's a difference. Even though you're not uttering the words, but you're holding the document, it's very recognizable that you're reading this document and you're thinking of the content of this document. That's why it's asr. And therein lies the difference between this halacha and the halacha vav. So let's see it inside. He's just thinking. Nonetheless, asr is prohibited. Like this is what we said, that categorically to think is mutter, is permitted, not suggestible, but nonetheless halachically permitted. It's not recognizable that you're thinking in these matters which are prohibited. Over here, it's recognizable to all. It's indicative to all that you're thinking in matters which are prohibited. Therefore, it is part of the prohibition of mimtzei chavtzecha. And we don't have to elaborate. We see the difference. The difference is very obvious. I just want to add before we go further. You see over here, we mentioned a few times throughout the halacha that this is the category of this halacha. Mimtzei chavtzecha. Obviously, there's subdivisions over here. These are details, but we just said that this is the category of mimtzei chavtzecha. We spoke about the relevance that it's not just time to give another level in this which we're prohibited to do on Shabbos. That I said that Rabbanan, let's find another level mimtzei chavtzecha because that's the wording of the Tanakh. No, we did say that it's clearly a step lower. If you remember, there's one thing which stands out very strong, that Rabbanan is never overridden by a mitzvah, and this is always overridden by a mitzvah. Mimtzei chavtzecha. But if you see that, we just use that term time and again. So we pointed out in the previous halacha we also had that quotation, but here he clearly quotes mimtzei chavtzecha even without any other word. Which you see, this is the category. You see, there's the quotation marks over here because this is the category of all these halacha, mimtzei chavtzecha. Even though there's other details, as we just noted. And then we go on. He says, if somebody, a letter is sent to him or her, he doesn't know what's written in it. So what's the problem? The problem is simple. You don't know what's written. It's an envelope on the table, for example. It could be something which is prohibited to read, one of these type of documents, a bill or whatever, something which is prohibited to read on Shabbos. But it could be it's a document which is a good thing, a flyer about Shabbos, a l'chaim, or l'chaim maybe it's more indicative from the outside what it is, but let's say it's a paper which has the schedule of the shul, the shiurim, the mincha, the ma'ariv, the schedule of Shabbos, which is something which you need for that Shabbos. You don't know what it is. So the problem is, if it's the good thing that you're going to open up, wonderful. If this is what you need for Shabbos, it's permitted, and you need it for Shabbos, that's great. But there's a 50% chance that this document is prohibited to open up on Shabbos. So are you allowed to take the chance to glimpse into this document to see what it is? And again, the problem, because every document, if you don't know what it is, 50% chance is something that is prohibited to read on Shabbos, and another 50% chance is that something which is permitted. Maybe L'Tzedek Shabbos, he says, it's for the sake of Shabbos. Something I need to know on Shabbos is an example we just gave. I need to know the schedule of the community schedule. But there's a slight chance again that it's something that's permitted, so maybe I shouldn't, because for a split second, I'm going to look into something that I'm prohibited to read. So maybe I shouldn't open up at all. Open up this document at all? Certainly not glimpse into it. So he says, no. The halacha is lenient over here. And says that if you don't know, a letter was sent to you, and again, it's in a way that you could open it up. I'm not going to go to the other details, can you open a letter or not, but it's something which is on your dining room table, as an example. You notice it on Shabbos, and it's not something you have to deal with the openings and so on, which is again a separate subject. Something which is open, it's lying there and folded, as an example of any idea, and as such you don't know what is written in it. Mutter, the halacha is mutter la'ayin bo. You're allowed to look into it, because maybe it's something that you really need for that Shabbos, and therefore you're allowed to take that glimpse, even though it's a possibility that it's something that you're not allowed to read on Shabbos. Because it's something that you might need that Shabbos, you're okay to open up to take a glimpse, but he just says, don't read the words when you're taking that glimpse, when you're opening it up to see what it is. Again, because there's a possibility that it's something you need, it's something that's permitted, it's something you need for the Shabbos. Don't read the words. Hold yourself, even though, again, we usually don't when we take a glimpse at any document. Shabbos, not Shabbos. But he tells you, and that you have to take that extra precaution, that even sometimes you do read something with your mouth, in other words, you utter the words of any document, don't do so when you are looking at that document to discern what it is, something which is permitted or prohibited. But you can go ahead and do so, to open it up to see what it is. And if you really know from the onset, if it's something, it's a business matter, in other words, the way it appears through the envelope, then like we just said, he concludes, you're not allowed to look into it, which is again, just goes right back to that very beginning of the halacha. If you clearly know, in any way, you can tell from the document, you can tell from the envelope that it's something about a business matter, you're not allowed to, again, even to look into it, even without reading. And here he adds, and this is probably wants to get into it, apparently it's redundant to what he said before, but he's coming from the previous statement that if you don't know, you're allowed to. If you do know, you're not allowed to open it up. So it's a follow-up, but also, namely, he wants to go ahead and say, this, he's adding another chidush over here, another point over here. Well, once you can't open it up, so then it's categorically muktzah. You remember that we learned in one of the idea of muktzah is something which is purposeless, is muktzah on Shabbos. And here, once you can't read it, so this paper is purposeless for you on Shabbos. Has a lot of purpose, again, for the middle of the week, especially these important examples that he gave. But on Shabbos, it's purposeless. So he says if it's purposeless, then you're not only not allowed reading it, but you're not allowed to move it as well, because it's muktzah. V'asegam b'tiltul, you're not moving. Again, we mentioned many times, he doesn't say touching, because muktzah is not about touching, it's about moving. Mishum muktzah, because of muktzah. And here the Alter Rebbe adds something very interesting. L'das Rabbeinu, this is the Alter Rebbe's insert, as we know already by now. Many times over, L'das Rabbeinu, according to Alter Rebbe, mutil l'taltelei, imeinu makbid olav l'tzapei slichus. Literally means you're allowed to move it if you're not bothered to cover the opening of your bottle. What does that have to do with anything? But the answer is simple. Just want to mention today things are different because every bottle has its covering. Every pot has its covering. We have so many different pots, different sizes, and everything has that perfect cover. It wasn't so, but even today, we gave the class to the other class. We just give an example. Sometimes we open a bottle of wine, we make Kiddush, we pour the wine for Kiddush or Abdullah, we don't find the cover. There's those who say that bottle of wine should be covered, even though there's no. By the way, I would just say I don't think there's a real source to it, but that's what people do. They cover the wine when they make Kiddush and Abdullah. You don't find the cover there; it's hiding under a plate or whatever it is. So you take a napkin, you put it over the cover, over the bottle. It should be closed. So we do sometimes do that as well. But in the past, they did it a little more because they had just a few pots and pans, and someone wanted to go to sleep. He was tired. We don't keep liquid open throughout the entire night, as an example. So they just take a napkin and put it. What today we do? You put it in the fridge. It's already secure. You put the cover over that pot. Even a cup. You have other things to cover it with. But in the past, it wasn't so. People have had very few dishes, and even had a lot, but there wasn't those perfect size covers and so on. So they used something just to push to cover it. Something was a piece of paper. Even paper was a rare commodity as well, as we I think we learned also in the past. We're going to learn, but it was common, much more common, more than today. But we can understand. It's like, again, just that example we gave with the kid, or something. We just take a napkin to cover over the top. So this is what Al Treb is talking about over here, and he's saying that if you don't care about that document that much, that you would put it over your bottle, over your cup, over your pot, over your pan, or whatever it is, then you can move it, because the simple reason, because then you can't say it's purposeless. It has a purpose. Because it's covering that liquid, which shouldn't be open all night, or it's covering the bottle of wine because you want to go into Kiddush and Abdullah. So again, the whole reason why we just said you cannot move, not only not read it, not open it up, but you cannot move it because it's purposeless. But if it has a purpose that you're just going to throw over your bottle or your cup or your plate even, you can say it's purposeless. As such, it's not muktzah. But if you read very carefully the Alter Rebbe, he says clearly, if you're not bothered by it, meaning to say that there's certain documents that you would never use, to no exception. If you're only sane, you'll never use, a sane person rather, will never use that to cover over the bottle or the pot or the pan. They'd go to sleep 5-10 minutes later to find something which would cover up the pot or the pan. But you have a document as an example, and it says the other party owes you $3,000 with his signature. You're not going to ever use that to cover a pot or a bottle. It's too dear to you. You're worried that something is going to be damaged, and because of that damage, something will go wrong. And you're very careful not to do anything with that, and you keep it a certain place. And therefore, the Alter Rebbe says it has to be something that you don't care. As an example alone, you're in a grocery store, you're missing $10 or whatever it is. They don't take that pen, whatever it is, and someone throws you $10 and you take a piece of paper, you write, okay, I took from you $10, I'll give it to you back next time I see you. That you don't care to use to cover the bottle, as an example. But a document which notes that you lent someone a few $1,000s, you're not throwing over a plate or a bottle. Therefore, it remains muktzah. Quick example, sometimes we're looking for a particular contact which is very important to us, and looking here and there, you don't find it until you call somebody and they have the exact number. So the first thing, you grab the first thing and you start writing it down, and then obviously eventually you put it into your notepad or your phone and so on. But the first thing, you grab whatever you can to get that number, because you want that number. You're looking for that contact. You're looking for that number. But a normal person, a sane person, will never see his passport on the shelf and just to write the number, the corner of the passport. One is only sane. They'll never do so. Obviously, you're talking about urgent emergencies is a total different idea. But anything other than that, you won't do so, because the passport is too dear for you just to write a number. Even though you can erase it, but you don't do that. And the same thing the Alter Rebbe says: if you're not makbid, if these documents you are makbid, you do care, as the example we just gave, that this document says that the other party owes you a few $1,000s, you're never using it just to throw it over a bottle. The Alter Rebbe says it remains muktzah, because then again it's purposeless for that Shabbos. It has a lot of purpose after Shabbos. This is a document which brings you that security, but in the context of Shabbos it's purposeless. Then you cannot not only read it or look into it, then you can move it, because it's totally purposeless. As opposed to if something you're not makbid, you don't care so much. Again, we gave the other example. Someone wrote quickly, owe me $5 or whatever, any other thing, then you can say it's not muktzah. Now I just want to conclude, it doesn't mean that you always have the bottle. Remember when we spoke about the halachas, really the very first halachas we learned about certain items of food, if it's okay for animal consumption as opposed to human consumption, it could be not muktzah as such. If you recall the details we mentioned then, it doesn't mean that you have to have that animal that you're actually giving it to. It was just, this was the lifestyle of people. They had livestock around, and there was chickens and so on. So the Halacha says that that's not muktzah because theoretically you can give it to your animal. It doesn't mean that you have to have the animal to give it to. I'm saying that because over here also doesn't mean that this document you must use only to cover a bottle or a pot. It means that if you don't care to do so with that document, then you could move it. What does it mean you can move it? Let's say it's on the shelf and you want to put it on the desk. Because the shelf, you're putting out plates on that shelf, preparing plates or putting away plates for the next morning, whatever it is. You're allowed to move it because theoretically you wouldn't care to use that to cover your bottle or your cup, so then it's not muktzah. How much more so if you really need it to to put it over your cup or your bottle. But it doesn't mean that you have to do that. It means that because you didn't care to do that, therefore it's not muktzah. As opposed to if you do care, the document is too dear for you to use it for something else, then it remains muktzah. Kol tov, spend your time meaningful, stay safe and sound.